And I think we'll reserve a little bit of time for questions at the end. So, first, I just wanted to explain that I really view school meals and the work that you all do as a vital form of public care infrastructure. So, a lot of times people think about school food as being a really important thing in terms of food assistance and food safety. And I think it is that, like, you certainly are doing those things in your communities, providing safe, nutritious meals to students, but you're also doing a lot of additional work, really providing care for students. A lot of times, like, you're the first people that they see in the morning. And I just think it's really important to recognize the role that you all play as um, these important adult figures within the educational system. So I like to think of school food as really at this intersection of care, education, and food systems. That said, when we think about school food around the world, 70% of publicly managed food systems are actually school food programs. So people don't always realize, I think, that school food, not only in the United States, but around the world, is this really huge lever for not only changing children's lives and public health, but also changing our food and agricultural systems. So this particular graphic shows a couple years ago the state of child feeding around the world. There's actually a new report that I think was just issued today, so I didn't have time to update the slide. But more or less, what I would like to say in relation to this is that more and more countries around the world are recognizing the importance of investing in child nutrition and developing school food systems that do more than just feed kids, but also provide public dollars toward farmers who are growing food using more sustainable practices and who are really trying to think about how local community economic development through farm to school programs can also be a big part of what school food looks like worldwide. So this is just a quick example from outside the United States. For anyone who has spent any time in Brazil, these foods might look familiar. This is actually a system of growing food using agroecological school food production techniques. And you can see kind of the landscape of what it looks like, the food they produced, and then what the ultimate meal looks like. And one thing that I think is really interesting, and I think we can sort of see when we look at a country like Brazil that actually treats school food as a human right. They guarantee in their constitution the right for all children to have access to free school meals in their public schools. But they go further than that, and they actually say that at least 30% of the ingredients they use in school meals have to be sourced from family scale farms that use organic or environment friendly techniques for food production. And I was actually at the UN Food Systems Summit earlier this summer and met one of the agricultural ministers from Brazil who said that they're increasing this minimum percentage to 45% nationwide. So when you hear an example like that of a really large scale national school food program that's feeding like all students in the country, but that also has these really strong expectations for how public dollars are being used, I think that that really shows us what the potential and power of our school food program here in the United States could be as well. So it's not only something that can really shape agricultural practices, but also like the dietary norms and sort of food preferences of children at the population level. That said, I was also asked to talk to you all about a brief history of school lunch, but I was told that you all maybe had a little bit of content about this in some of your other materials. So I'm going to keep this section short. I wanted to highlight, because I think sometimes people talk about the history of the National School Lunch Program in the United States as, hey, we created this national program in 1946 in the wake of World War II, and suddenly it appeared. And technically, that's true. Like, that's when we created a national program in the United States. But I think if we start the history at that point, we really erase about 50 years of very important civil society activism and struggle, much of which was led by women in their communities to create these programs in the first place. So this slide just shows a few of the women, in particular women home economists, who are really involved in shaping what some of these early programs looked like. So this picture is actually from the very first central kitchen that was created in Boston Public Schools. You can see here that they actually repurposed these very large-scale laundry baskets into basically delivery vehicles for pre-made sandwiches and milk jugs and things like that that they would send to the elementary, middle, and high schools across the city. And this was really at the time like an effort that was sort of hybrid between the school's board and a lot of volunteer assistance. And this particular picture was from 1894. So that kind of gives you like a sense of how long these programs have been going on. So this program in Boston was created in 1894. A lot of program expansion throughout the 1910s and 1920s in particular. I wanted to show in particular because you all at Chef Ann Foundation are such leaders in scratch cooking that a lot of these early programs really, I think, because of the technology available at the time, did emphasize fresh food preparation, but there was a lot of variation about whether or not they really respected the cultural foodways of the children they were feeding. So, for example, in New York City, their first school lunch program across the city started in 1908. And one of the things that they did that I think is noteworthy is that they hired cooks from the community to prepare nutritionally balanced meals that were tailored to the ethnic tastes and religious requirements of the students that they were feeding in these respective schools. So they felt like it wasn't enough to just make the food scientifically nutritious and safe in the way that these home economists maybe would design the menus and the food preparation, but they really had to acknowledge the young people with cultural preferences and unique backgrounds as well. So there was also early precedent in terms of school gardens. These are particular pictures and posters that are from World War One, when there was a pretty widespread campaign to promote school gardens as something that really would help to provide more fresh food to school food programs. And at the same time, we have some early precedents of farm to school of really using shared kitchen infrastructure in schools to do, for example, community canning. This is a set of pictures that I found that show both the students and community members and the school food workers coming together to preserve a peach harvest, for example. So, within a lot of these early years of school food in the United States, before we created a national school lunch program, the vision was pretty different from the program that we started with at the national level. But I think it's actually pretty similar to what a lot of the vision is that many people hold today. So, certain things that they really emphasized were that the ideal school food program would provide free meals to all students, that school gardens and cooking classes would be integrated to the curriculum, that students would learn canning and food preservation. So they would learn science, but also the skills of practical life in relation to their school meals. They would learn about health, nutrition, and biology as well through school meal programs, and they would engage their family and their neighborhoods through the school meal programs. So that was a big part of the vision. A second component that I always like to highlight is that one of the things that a lot of these progressive era activists were also trying to do is to create safe, good quality jobs for women workers in their communities who otherwise maybe would have been working in factories that were not as safe as the school kitchens. So this was something that they also sort of felt could be a way for women to have access to more professional paid employment as well. So I'll end this portion by just sharing a quote that I really like from MS Medley, who was the school nutrition director for Philadelphia Public Schools at the time. She said that school lunch is not to be a mere appendage of the educational system. It should be closely linked with the work of the school, one of its arteries through which the active blood of cooperation runs. The departments with which it may be correlated are domestic science, school gardens, vocational classes, and the medical department. So it kind of gives you a sense that a lot of these early visionaries in the school food movement in the United States really felt like this should be kind of a core component of education instead of kind of what it has to a large extent become in the United States, which is kind of siloed off as a support service for public schools. So I think it's important to recognize that there was originally this real vision of integration and to really kind of keep pointing to the fact that this really is a part of the educational system and needs to be valued as such. And school nutrition professionals really need the resources to engage in the educational components as well. So just to kind of fast forward, really what ended up happening in terms of moving from those early experimental nonprofit school lunch programs that spread throughout the United States in both urban and rural communities was the Great Depression really kind of fueled not only hunger and economic need among communities all around the country, but they also really, in this time period, started to realize, oh, schools would be a great place to send commodities to help stabilize agricultural markets. So during the Great Depression, this was the first time the federal government got involved in school food. They started sending commodities to schools and also providing free labor through the Works Progress Administration to support school meal programs across the United States. And that kind of continued to help these programs grow. And after World War II, there was really this desire to have a permanent national program. So what we ended up having was this legislation that created language that always had these kind of two priorities in mind of safeguarding the health and well-being of the nation's children, while also encouraging the domestic consumption of nutritious agricultural commodities. And I think that it was definitely something that a lot of these early reformers and home economists wanted the school food program to be rooted within the Department of Education. It ended up being in the Department of Agriculture. But one of the big wins that they did have was to make these programs not for profit school lunch programs. That was a really important piece of what they had emphasized that they felt was important because they had seen the effects of privatization and outsourcing, even at that time, that they felt were introducing things that weren't necessarily in the best interest of the children and the public value of these programs. So I'll just quickly mention that in the first 20 years of the National School Lunch Program, there was a lot of expansion of the program, but in the civil rights era, there was this broad scale recognition, partly led by a community-based research project supported by and coordinated by Jean Fairfax, where they produced a report called Their Daily Bread that really inventoried across the country how so many children that really should have had access to free school meals were not getting access to those meals. They actually estimated that about 20 million children who needed free or reduced rate lunches were not getting them. So this helped to spur what some historians refer to as the right to lunch movement. So a lot of people were really sort of pushing the government to make good on the promise that all quote unquote needy children should have access to a free school meal. So that was one of the big kind of food justice fights that was really rooted in community efforts to actually first document what the issue was in their communities, and then secondly, to use legal tools like lawsuits against, for example, uh, your school board or other kinds of things to kind of force compliance with this national law. So there was a lot of community effort to expand access to free school meals. But at the time, the federal government provided what they called special assistance funding, which allowed schools to have additional money to spend on food and to spend on equipment to try to help them kind of meet the need, especially in a lot of these schools that actually were never built with kitchens or cafeterias in the first place. They might have had just more or less like a closet that they were kind of converting into a kitchen. And so schools were not actually able to use these special assistance funds to hire more people. So they couldn't spend the money on labor and they also couldn't spend it on infrastructure. So at the one hand, there was this big expansion of access to free school meals, but we also had this big kind of swing in the direction of having pre-processed foods and a heat and serve model in schools because to a large extent during this big expansion of the program, they weren't building out new kitchens and cafeterias, they were putting in rethermalization equipment. So here we are kind of today having some of these same debates and conversations about who has access to school meals and also what is the quality of school meals? What does that look like? I think in some of your pre-work assignments or reading materials, some of the material related to universal values aligned school meals was something that some of you may have looked at. These are a couple of the case studies that National Farm to School Network has created if anyone wants to look at them more in depth. But I really just include this slide to show that there's this ongoing movement right now to really try to get free school meals and to focus this conversation on what quality looks like and what these programs should be accomplishing. So I'll end this portion just by saying that school food is a microcosm of our larger food system, but it's also a powerful niche for innovating and for changing what our food systems look like. School food programs bring together not only the private sector and public sector, but also really established businesses as well as entrepreneurial businesses, for profit and not for profit sectors. So it kind of brings so many different stakeholders to the table and helps us see what ways public policy can really support sustainability transitions within food systems more broadly. So I wanted to just thank you all and highlight that you all, especially through this apprenticeship that you all are doing, you're playing a really important role in this systems change work, both within the school food system directly, but then also I think with the broader food system in the US. And I'll just take my last minute or so to say that I think one of the things that I really appreciate about the Chef Anne Foundation is that of the organizations kind of working in this space in the United States, I think that they've been the most vocal about saying that if we really want to have this positive vision of school food in the United States, and if we want to, if we have any chance of sort of achieving the really positive things we know school food is capable of, we have to really center school nutrition workers and think about not only what skills they may need, but also what sort of career pathways and economic supports, better wages and working conditions they might need to be able to afford to stay in these jobs. So Chef Anne Foundation, I think, talks a lot about building culinary capacity, so increasing scratch cooking in schools. I think that that is huge for unlocking a lot of the potential for sourcing local food in schools and doing more culturally relevant cooking, like what they were doing in New York City back in 1908. But we can't really do that without having a stable, respected workforce of people who can afford to stay in these jobs in the long run. So I wanted to just end by saying that I have the real privilege right now of getting to lead a national study that's funded by the US Department of Agriculture that is focused on the school food workforce. And I do have Chef Anne Foundation actually as one of the research partners in this. And we have been doing some ongoing research. We're about a little over a year into what is a 3-year project. So if anybody is interested, I think Erica is going to share these slides if you want to see what any of our kind of preliminary findings are so far. We did a listening session last summer where we had about 60 different stakeholders across the school food system talk to us about what they felt was really happening in the workforce and what sort of research would be useful. And then we funded 4 research projects from other universities across the country that they're actively working on. And so if you're curious about what we funded or what you might be able to expect in terms of information from this project, I included a link to that slide deck as well. So I think I am out of time, so I'll stop there. But thank you all for being a part of this program and for all of the hard work that you put into making your communities so much better through the food that you're providing to kids.
Thank you, Jennifer. And then if you do need a little bit of extra time, our operations team has said they don't need a full 25 minutes for breakout
Oh,
rooms.
I could
So this,
show a little bit about the school food workforce study if people are interested,
yeah, I think it'd be a
or I
few minutes
could
to go over
not.
that. I think if you want to touch on that for a few minutes and then we could do about 10 minutes of questions, that should be perfect.
Okay, let me pull it up. And I can also provide, I think Erico has it, but in case anyone just wants the slide there. Here's the one that I was just sharing, and there's a link to the second set of slides that is embedded in there. Okay, so I will go back in time to just say super briefly that I wrote a book that came out in 2019 called The Labor of Lunch: Why We Need Real Food and Real Jobs in American Public Schools. And I think for a large part of my time in grad school, which I guess I started working in school food space in about 2010, up until when that book published. A big part of what I was trying to do is to get people who work in this space and also the federal government to realize that we really need to take labor and working conditions seriously when we're thinking about how to improve school food programs. And so for me, it was really exciting when I saw the US Department of Agriculture announced that they were going to be making a $1.5 million research award to actually do the first national study of the school food workforce. So it's, for me, a very special opportunity to get to work with people on this project. Oops, I guess I need to go over to the other slides. There we go. Okay, so we are really working to try to understand on the one hand, like, what does this workforce actually look like? So the most, it's a comprehensive data that we have is from a report that came out in 2024 that's mostly using census data, but it's not particularly accurate. So this kind of gives us a sense that actually the number of school food workers has declined over the past decade. They're older than the average worker in the workforce. The median for food service is actually in their 50s versus 28 in like non-school food service settings. So we've heard a lot of concerns about this being a workforce that is aging. And I think it is still very much true that this is a workforce that is very highly gendered. It's about 93% women in this workforce. And there has been, I think, some update to this as a result of some school food authorities really raising wages to kind of compete a little bit more with the market during COVID. But the most recent national statistics show that the median hourly wage for school food workers is less than $13 an hour. So that's a real problem for people, being able to afford to stay in these jobs. I did some work with our Wisconsin Healthy School Meals for All Coalition, where we did like just a statewide study of what our school food workforce looked like. And we found that part-time staff really make up the backbone of our workforce in the state. 4 out of 5 non-managerial workers have part-time hours. And those hours are also seasonal. Most of them are actually working 9 months or less per year. And we're pretty much right at that national average here in Wisconsin of 12.74 an hour in terms of the kind of average wage. And if we look at what this actually looks like relative to other occupations, the infographic that you see here is actually from national statistics, not Wisconsin based. But you can see that people who choose to work in school K-12 settings are actually taking a pretty heavy economic penalty for choosing to work in that setting versus an institutional food service environment like assisted living facility or hospital or something like that. And one of the things that people have also kind of pointed out a lot, which may or may not be true in your districts, is that there tends to be a pretty hefty hourly wage discrepancy between school cafeteria workers and custodial workers in K-12 schools. So those are some of the things that, in particular, among our Wisconsin school nutrition professionals, they really wanted to make sure we are communicating to school boards and school administrators so that they kind of understood what this broader landscape looks like. But again, this is data that is taken from the census, so it's not necessarily extremely accurate. So one of the things that I think is really great is that with this study, we're looking at what is the current state of the school food workforce, how, if at all, are recruitment, retention, and job satisfaction impacted by different characteristics and employment structures that school food authorities may have. And then the piece that I think I found most hopeful about the charge that USDA gave us is they wanted us to document the most promising strategies for creating a stable and respected school food workforce that is equipped to provide nutritious meals to students while also supporting resilient local and regional food systems. So I think that that language and that vision of what a school food job would be is quite different actually from how it's been conceptualized in the past by USDA. So where we're at now is we actually just funded 4 projects, and I'll just touch on each of these for like 20 seconds and then I'll stop. I wanted to just flag that two of these projects are actually national projects that are being done in collaboration with the School Nutrition Association. So one of them is really focused on actually getting like a sample of like 1,300 frontline school food workers from across the country, and really trying to make sure that that sample is representative of the populations in those states so that we can have a better understanding than what the generic census data gives us of what school food working conditions are like and how much people are earning and the demographics of the workforce in these different areas. And then one of the things that I think is really cool about this study is that they're really working with labor researchers. So it's not just like people who do public health or school food research, like it's a very interdisciplinary team. So they're going pretty deeply into um, some of the ways in which people typically tend to measure and talk about job quality. The other study that's being done with the School Nutrition Association is actually going to be fielded with the SMA Trends survey, which some of you may even get an answer. But that particular survey is really focused on looking at some of the drivers of turnover and some of the things that help with retention of workers once they're hired. And then one thing, this is actually the only project we funded that doesn't include original research, but it's a project that's looking at some of the things related to the school food workforce and other education support staff in schools in terms of who makes up that workforce and how much they earn. But the thing that probably is most exciting to me about this particular project that we funded is that they're actually looking at the relationship between spending money on school food service labor and student outcomes, um, trying to kind of make the case that you actually get a high return on investment in terms of student outcomes if you invest in your school food workforce. So I think that that will be something that will probably be quite helpful in terms of talking to administrators and finance people. And then lastly, our most participatory project that we funded is actually one that is being done in partnership with labor unions and workers from LA Unified and New York City Public Schools that really is looking at the role that unionization and different basically contract negotiation and um, bargaining priorities, like what that actually does in terms of people's real job experience and compensation, so that we can have a better understanding of the impact of unionization in particular. So those are the projects that we have going on that should wrap up at the end of next year. So probably before you all finish your fellowship, we'll have results to share back with you, and hopefully you'll be able to use them in ways that support advocacy at the state level, federal level, or even in your own school districts to make sure that school food workers are really getting the compensation that they deserve for the work they do. I'll stop there. Thanks, Erica.
Thank you, Jennifer, and thank you for that great information. Very exciting to see about what's happening with that study. And I think I put in the chat as well, but we have some LAUSD apprentices actually starting this fall with us, so very excited to see that as well. Any questions for Jennifer? And if you'd prefer to put a question in the chat as well, you're welcome to do that. Give it a minute.
I don't want to shortchange your conversations either. So
Oh no, you are okay. Any questions? Okay, I'm gonna give it like 30 more seconds. Oh, we have a question from Eli. Oh, good question. Can you tell us about what got you into school lunch to begin with? That is a great question.
yes. So, I mean, I definitely had my own experiences with school lunch when I was a kid, but when I was in graduate school, I really didn't know exactly what I wanted to do, but I knew that I was interested in food systems. And I remember my advisor telling me, well, why don't you write like, you've got like four different ideas. Why don't you write just like a two-page summary of what you think you might do with each of those ideas? And one of them was related to farm to school. And I realized when I sat down and started writing that I just had so much more to say and so many questions about the school food one than any of the others, because I think school food is just so interesting because on the one hand, it's this like, especially like in places where you have like already large scale national programs, like there are over 100,000 schools in the United States that participate in this program and like 30 million kids. And so when you think about actually like having an impact at a really broad scale, I feel like the National School Lunch Program is like such a huge like intervention point in food systems because of just the sheer scale of it and the fact that it's everywhere. Like it's not just like in urban areas or rural or like one part of the country. And so I love that it's like this existing infrastructure and existing program that like yes, it has its flaws and like people are working really hard to like make those things better, but it's something that we have to work with and we're not starting from scratch. And so I think I just became like so I don't know, just excited about the potential of what school food can be in our communities. And I had the really fortunate experience when I was in grad school of, well, first of all, not knowing much. And so I just spent a lot of time trying to learn from other people. But for whatever reason, I ended up actually spending so much more of my time instead of like on farms where they were growing produce, like for farm school programs in Connecticut, where I was. I ended up spending so much time in school kitchens, talking to the workers, and they would bring like sometimes pictures to show like 20 years ago like that they had their own baking or whatever it might be. And I think that that really sparked my curiosity about like, well, why is it that scratch cooking is something that, I mean, this was back in like 2012, that people talk about as being so out of the ordinary in the US context. Like, why isn't that the norm here? Like, what's the story behind that? And I think I also really lucked into at the time, the place where I was living, they were organized in a union with Unite Here, and they ran something called a Real Food, Real Jobs campaign. I think because I'd been spending enough time in the kitchens and cafeterias, they kind of knew me. Were like, you young girl have some research skills, and you seem to want to listen to us. So I was asked to help them with this research project that the workers themselves led, and we ended up creating a report that really provided the vision for what the school food workers in New Haven wanted their community to look like. And they taught me so much about this relationship between food quality and job quality. And they also taught me like a really different way to approach research than what I was actually trained to do in grad school. And I've been really lucky because at Wisconsin, where I am now, I'm in a department called Civil Society and Community Studies. So I get to do a lot of this work like with real people, like the Wisconsin like Healthy School Meals for All Coalition and so on. And I think the big thing that I've always kind of taken with me is one, the potential of these programs. I think that they can do so much across so many different things that we care about in life. But then, secondly, that I really think so much of that is not possible if you don't value the people who are doing the work. And so that has kind of become like the mission in terms of the piece that I work on.
Thank you
Thanks for
so
that
much.
question.
I love that. Okay, well, we are going to move on to our breakout rooms. So, Jennifer, we could let you go, but thank you so much for joining
Yeah,
us.
thank you so much for letting me join you all, and congratulations. And I look forward to hearing what you all do with the program.
Thank you. Okay. We are going to move on to breakout rooms with our operations team. Before Juliana sends us into those breakout rooms, I wanted to make a couple of quick announcements. First, we do have some Colorado apprentices on this call as well. Colorado apprentices, at this point, you are welcome to leave the call as this activity is just for our California team. So we thank you all for joining us and I hope you have a good evening. But yeah, you do not need to stay on for breakout rooms. We could let you go. So you are welcome to hop off. Second thing I want to mention is in our breakout rooms, we will not be able to have a Spanish interpreter in each room. So if you are a Spanish speaker, We apologize that you won't be able to listen in on Spanish audio, but we will record each breakout room and send it to each individual group. And be sure to add in the ability to add Spanish captions to that so you could rewatch your breakout rooms session in Spanish. So, with that being said, Juliana, are we good to go into the groups?
Yes, we're good to go. Can I open up the rooms?
Yep, and then oh yep, and then operations specialist, don't forget to start recording. And then Tahar, to answer your question, anyone who is a Colorado apprentice can leave. California apprentices, please stay on the call. Okay, and yep, you are good to open up the rooms.
Awesome.
Great. Okay. So we are just going to end with some housekeeping. Also, before we get to housekeeping, I want to mention I think there's a little bit of confusion on what time our virtual learning sessions are, because I was the one who sent out the invite. So you might have seen that it was at 5 o'clock, and that is because I'm in the Mountain Time Zone. I'm in Denver, so that is might be why you saw it was at 5 o'clock p.m. Just for moving forward, our virtual learning sessions, all of them will be at 4 p.m. Pacific time. 5 p.m. Mountain. But I apologize for the confusion. I didn't realize when I sent it out, it was going to send it out in my time zone. Um, Okay, so let's get to the final housekeeping. So first thing, which I think everyone here is aware of, but we have Juliana back with us, which is very exciting. So she is back from her leave. Moving forward, Juliana will be everyone's point of contact for the program. So her email is in the program guide. Juliana will also send you all a follow-up email tomorrow, so you'll receive an email from her tomorrow. But if you have any program questions, you're more than welcome to reach out to Juliana, and you could also continue to reach out to our general ca.apprentice@chefandfoundation.org email if anything, if you ever need anything. If Juliana's out of office, you're also more than welcome to reach out to me as well. And then a couple other things. Just a reminder to everyone, we also had a survey go out on Monday, just to ask about your what you're looking for in the program, and that sort of thing. It is not required that you complete it, but we would love if you're able to share your feedback. We use those surveys to improve the program for you all and also future participants. And then final couple of things, our next virtual learning session will be September 24th, so that's in 2 weeks. And again, we meet every couple weeks on Wednesdays at 4 p.m. Pacific, which is 5 p.m. Mountain. So if you see 5 p.m., that's in the Mountain Time Zone, it's 4 p.m. Pacific Time Zone. And don't forget to complete your reflection assignments, which will be due 1 week from today. I know I went through that really quickly. Any final questions? And I hope everyone also had a good time in their breakout rooms as well. Okay, well, we'll let everyone go. Apologies, it went over a little bit, but we'll send out the recordings. And again, we'll send out each individual group's recordings as well so everyone could re-listen if they would like to. But otherwise, we'll see everyone in a couple weeks on the 24th. And I hope everyone has a good rest of their evening. Thank you all. Bye, everyone.